Hi, this is Joe Shannon. I'm a lawyer, a husband, a father of 6 kids, and I also host a podcast called Opening Statement with Joe Shannon. Please consider listening to our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, and any other folks that host podcasts. Just Google Joe Shannon and podcast, and you'll find it. I hope you enjoyed the show. We're here with Jay Urban. How are you, Jay?
I'm great, Joe. How are you today?
Good, good. So before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, folks. My name is Jay Urban, and I'm a trial lawyer in mainly Milwaukee, but I have a practice throughout the state of Wisconsin and occasionally into other states.
So I always like to get people's background and where they come from, because I think it's fascinating how people go from, either humble beginnings, or some people are born into, different situations. I know that the road for Jay Urban starts somewhere in Tomah, Wisconsin. Am I right about that?
Well, it depends on how far back you go. I was originally born during the race riots in Milwaukee in the long, hot summer of 1967. So I spent a few months in an orphanage in Milwaukee, and then I was adopted by some folks in Tomah, which is a town halfway between Milwaukee and Minneapolis, and then spent my 18 years growing up in Tomah, about 5,000 people.
Wow. So you're a small town boy. You were a small town boy.
Very much, but I have that. But I always had the connection, sort of in your DNA, I guess you could say, with Milwaukee, and I think that did have something throughout my life to driving me to, want to be back here to practice, and influenced me to some extent. So I like to think about it as the best of both worlds. I like things that are very rural, remote. I like things that are more, pun on my name, urban. A little bit of both.
How far is Tomah from Milwaukee?
It's halfway between Milwaukee and Minneapolis, and it is right on the interstate, so they call it where the I divides. But almost a 3-hour drive north.
Oh, wow. I remember seeing that on the expressway when I drove by. I thought, Jay Urban. I remember one time that you and I were at some tavern somewhere. We were talking, and I heard your story, and I've always been fascinated by it. I always like hearing adoption stories and where people came from. I know I want to say that the Steve Jobs was adopted as well. And what the world would be like without Apple, I don't know what it would be like, because I think I'm talking to you on an Apple phone, and a lot of these broadcasts are on an Apple brand. So the world's a little bit different because Jay Urban is around.
Well, Joe, you didn't have to set the bar that high.
Well, I don't think.
But you're right. Steve Jobs was also, I think he was Syrian, but he was adopted by a Wisconsin farm family, and he grew up in a larger community than I did. I think the Green Bay area. But yes, he's probably the most, business-wise famous adoptee from Wisconsin. We've had some other tech entrepreneurs from Wisconsin. Marc Andreessen grew up in the area close to me, and he was the one that started whatever the predecessor of, before there was Google, there was like Netscape or something like that. So, yeah, but you're right. I mean, there's good stock here.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the hinterland.
Yeah, I never knew until just now that Steve Jobs was from Wisconsin.
That's right. I'm trying to think if his sister is, because he has an adopted sister too, and I just don't know enough about his story. I should, but I do know for a fact that he did grow up with in Wisconsin.
Tell me about growing up in Tomah.
Tomah's an ideal place to be a young boy back then in the 70s. We were able to I lived in a kind of a more remote part of town, and there was a park nearby, and we would play pickup, baseball all the time, hockey, pond hockey, all that kind of thing. It was really a kind of a perfect place. There's a the most famous, fiction writer from Tomah is a guy who wrote a book called The Diary of the Kid Last Picked. And it really, he went on to become a San Francisco journalist, but he wrote this book about growing up in Tomah in the 70s. And it's kind of like what you would read about in like a comic book or something like that. Like we could walk to the swimming pool. Nobody was really monitoring everything. So kind of a world gone by. It was just small enough to be like that. And then that's, so at a very young age, I didn't really have a lot of contact with what a lawyer was, except my block was vacant. It was like wooded. And the most prominent lawyers in town, they each built houses across the street. And I thought, oh, that's what lawyers do.
So was your high school, were you like pretty successful in high school and all that?
I wouldn't say I'm the smartest book person in the world, or school. I would never, if I was interested in something, I would apply myself. I think there's a commonality among trial lawyers in that regard sometimes, or what type of intelligence and things like that. My schooling was influenced by a guy who's now our governor, Tony Evers. Tony Evers was my science teacher growing up. He was my principal in middle school, and then my principal in high school. So I've known him my whole life, and he was the one that first told me, because I was organizing some sort of disturbance in middle school about some injustice, that I should be a lawyer. So that with the neighbor doing it is kind of how it was. So I was a good student, but not a great student.
So tell me about your first. One of the things that I always remember, and I think one of the reasons why I like owning my own business, is my first job that I started in 7th grade was I had my own paper route. And so I went and I delivered the Yakima Herald Republic, and it was a morning route, and 150 or so papers were dropped off. I had to fold them all, and I delivered them on my bike, and got done around 6:30. I developed a healthy relationship with bakeries that were open at 6:30 in the morning. And, it gave me that whole idea of, I actually had to go door to door collecting every month for the, to pay for the paper. And I found out a lot about people that way. And I think that's kind of gave me enough background to know how to talk to people when I'm picking a jury and figure out who would be the most fair for a case. How about you? Tell me about some of your first jobs.
Well, it's actually I think we've had that conversation, because that was my first job too. I didn't have my own route when I was even too young to probably be doing it. I subbed for a guy who was on my hockey team. And so, yes, being entrepreneurial that way. And then my first job, actually, I was a cartoonist. That's how I ended up being involved with my principal. So he let me do kind of a satire cartoon in the school bulletin. And then that morphed itself into me doing I'd paint these caricatures of people in the community on a cedar plank, and people still have them, so they would sell them for Christmas and all this kind of stuff. So I that's how I made my money before I was able to work. And then when I did turn, I think you could get a work permit at 15. Then I worked, I had a job in the grocery store. We'd get up early and do that kind of thing. So I always worked, and I was always very entrepreneurial. And I think that you're right. There's very few careers that you can do that in anymore. Law being, being our kind of law is one of them. So I do look at those early experiences the same way that you do, Joe.
Yeah, people ask me sometimes what I do for a living, and I tell them I'm 100% commissioned salesman.
I like using in college. I became a bartender then, and so I think it's also like being a bartender.
How so?
Well, you're interacting with all sorts of people in the public, and sometimes they want your advice, and sometimes they don't, but they all want it, and you're before the reason I always thought the reason that they called it that you passed the bar is because in the Wild West, the trials were in the taverns. The judge would run the circuit, and that's how you would settle your dispute, hopefully without a lot of alcohol.
So
so I always liked the bar. So the best bartending gig I had then was I had a regular group that would come in on Sunday for brunch, and they wouldn't drink a lot, and I never knew what the group was at first, but I was sworn to secrecy, and it turns out it was the House leader for the Republicans, and it was the governor at the time. I'm blanking on his name. And anyway, they would just discuss what was going to happen in the state for the week.
Really?
And they would do it over a Bloody Mary, and that's a far cry. So that brings us to the 80s, but that's a far cry from how politics are done now. That's for sure.
So
so I always had that kind of, and they'd occasionally ask me what I thought about a certain thing. So that's really what led to me then learning even more about the politics of law and whose side are you on? Because I didn't know really what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. There was no such thing in a small town, Joe, probably like you, of a personal injury lawyer like what we do. There was no subspecialty.
No. Where I grew up in Yakima, Washington, I basically, when I was in college, I spent a summer interning for the state's attorney's office. They call it the prosecuting attorney's office out there. And so I got a heavy dose of what the criminal law folks do, the police officers, and then the prosecuting attorneys and public defenders. And I tell you, I was, to put it mildly, I was definitely determined not to be in that arena, just because of how depressing it was to see, these folks that, most of it was a lot of local, preying on people close to them. And I just, I couldn't, I was so happy that there was very, very gifted people that were dealing with those situations. And there was other areas of law where we could get into to help people that was not that. So, and Yakima, they didn't really, I don't, at the time, I didn't really know much about the private lawyers much. But yeah, in small towns, you pretty much have to do a number of different things to survive.
And that's the kind of lawyer I thought I was going to be, because I did then take the advice that I was given by these different mentors. My folks were very, very supportive, and we had, we didn't have a lot of money, but we weren't wanting for anything ever growing up. But they weren't in the law or any of those kind of professions. So I took that advice seriously, but I didn't know, what type of lawyer I would end up being until later, and almost until law school, actually.
So let's back up. So you graduate from Tomah, and where did you decide to go to college?
I ended up going into the university. I went to a public grade school, high school, and so forth, and then ended up going to the University of Wisconsin system. So I graduated from Madison at an English degree. And at that time, even going into college, I knew that it was just a stepping stone. I knew I was going to be a lawyer. So really all I did was take classes that would help me prepare to go to law school or to take the LSAT. So I took a lot of philosophy, a lot of history, a lot of English. That was my route. I mean, as you know, people go into it different ways. Engineering, there's no field that you can't go into, but that's what I did. I had a liberal arts education. And then when I graduated, got waitlisted at Madison for law school and got in at Marquette. And that's where I always had that kind of DNA pull, or whatever you want to call it, to come back to Marquette. And so I went to Milwaukee, because I'd only been to Milwaukee before coming to visit the law school one time. And when I came to the law school, I met a professor named Professor Giardi, James Giardi. And he's passed away now, but he at that time ran a practice series of classes all about tort law. And so I didn't know what a tort was. And he, I read his book and I watched that, and I ended up taking his whole thing. So when I graduated from law school, I was able to try a case within a week. Between the trial practice course they have there and the tort system. I understand that the law school is completely different now, and they don't have that, because I hire lawyers out of there and I hire clerks, and they don't have that anymore. But it ended up being the best thing that I ever did. And I know you and I have talked about this. You've had children go to Marquette. You've had other people go to Marquette. I think you might have even gone to Marquette. And so that Jesuit Socratic method of education, and especially in our field, I feel really was what launched.
You know, I one thing that that I really look at when I'm thinking about hiring somebody, I really do like a liberal arts education, just because I think to be great in business, I don't care if it's law or whatever, you need to be able to write well. You need to be able to read well and understand, and you need to be able to understand history and what motivates people. And you need to learn to be able to speak well as well. And I think, if you have a well-rounded education in that regard, obviously we want the medical people to definitely know organic chemistry and all those things, obviously. But I'm talking about in the outside business world, like what we're in, an English degree or a history degree, which is what I have, is really good, because I think if you develop a lifelong curiosity for why things happened or how things happened in the past, it's a healthy thing, because the worst thing you can do is think you know all the answers, and you need to keep questioning. I agree, but you're right. I do have a couple of kids that have gone through Marquette. I have one that's a senior now, and then I have one that's a sophomore. I ended up going to college out in the West Coast at a little school called University of Portland. This little small Holy Cross school, about 3,000 kids now, I think, and really, really good school for me. But so you get your English degree, you're off to Marquette, you do well there. So most people just go right to a big firm after that. What did you do?
Well, kind of made a mistake, I think, but at the time the economy was down, and I just always was stubborn. Well, if you call my parents would call it stubborn, but I just had this sort of overdeveloped sense of justice, to quote The Princess Bride. And so I refused to take an insurance company or defense or any other job. And I had to pay for law school myself with loans. And so I really should have done that. But instead, I was just insistent that I was going to only do plaintiff work. And that made it very hard to get a job. So what I did was just started going through the phone book back then and showing up at law firms that did that kind of work. And I figured my leg up would be hand delivering my resume, and they would have known that I went through this trial practice. So I did very, very well towards the end of law school when it came to, mock trial and trial practice and the tort stuff. And so I went around and hand delivered my resume, but the economy was really bad then. It was the early 90s. And so I did finally get a job with a firm that had like a high volume of low dollar cases. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to make enough money to support myself, but I'm going to learn between my schooling and between, trying cases right away. I'm going to learn more than everybody else by doing it. And so that was how I started.
You got right away, you end up trying cases, huh?
I tried my first case within a week of graduating, because Wisconsin has a diploma privilege if you go to one of the Wisconsin schools, and your school will vouch for your ethics. You can get a license. I was licensed to practice law. We graduated, May 12th, and by the 18th I had my license, and I tried a case in June. My first injury case, because it was ready to try, and my boss at the time I think the reason that he brought me in is because he had been very successful with this volume type practice, but he needed to be in the office. So his job was, he would manage all the cases, settle all the cases. He knew how to try a case, and he taught me that as best he could. But my job was to handle all the cases when they came into litigation. So I had over 100 files dropped on my desk right away that were in some various phase of litigation, where I had to get discovery out. And I remember it was a whiplash case, and it was actually an easier case to try because the defense had admitted liability. And so the other advantage of the case is you didn't always have to pay the jury fee. And so the case was also tried to a judge. So it was a great first experience because I didn't have, the thing they don't teach you in law school is how to pick a jury, which is the most important part of trial. And so I was able to try the first one in front of a judge, but it was a whiplash type of case, and I beat the offer. So my boss was happy with me. I got to come to work the next week.
Well, that's great. So how long did you basically apprentice with that firm?
So I did that for a few years, and then I just realized a couple of things. Number one, that the only way to be successful in your and my kind of work is you can either be a really, really good lawyer and work for a big shop, or you have to be able to develop a way to get your own business. And I've always been, pretty social. I guess that's the bartender in me. And so I just started getting really involved in the community and our organizations, and I started bringing in my own cases. And then another firm in town was looking for, a couple of firms actually were looking for what was called then a lateral hire. I don't know if they still call it that now. So I went to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I then went to a firm that had high dollar cases, but very, very few cases. So I would concentrate just on, co-working up as part of the team, high dollar cases. But what ended up happening is I just started, even as a young lawyer, getting a lot of cases, including out of my hometown. So that curve, we talk about flattening the curve and everything like that. That curve ended up happening for me pretty quickly for somebody who did not grow up in Milwaukee. So I ended up developing. So I did the first job for a few years, the second job for a few years, and then I decided to go out on my own. And I did it the right way. The only cases that I brought with me were cases that I had signed up or generated. And some of I happened to have generated a couple of really good cases, and those people were loyal enough to go with this young lawyer in 1999 to start his own firm. And then the rest is history.
Over 21 years you've been
so far
practicing under your own firm, huh?
That's right. A classmate of mine from law school that I met on the first day of law school, because he's a T and I'm a U.
Yeah.
So it's Urban and Taylor, and we were friends right away. We had similar upbringings, we're involved in sports, small towns, that kind of thing. Although he's from Missouri, and we've been practicing ever since.
Your building there in Milwaukee. It's an impressive building. Are you still have an office there in Milwaukee?
Yeah. So we started, when we started the firm, we started in an historic old building, and you're right. So I at the time, I didn't know how I was going to kind of evolve into the practice of it. And you and we met pretty soon after that, Joe, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, I wanted to buy a building because I thought I would have I didn't want to be an advertiser in the sense that I had a billboard or something like that, but I always have been into signage and marketing. And so we bought a small office building, and all our tenants now but I bought it at the wrong time. I bought it during another crash. And so my anchor tenant was a subprime lender. They went under. And we ended up filling the building, though, with other lawyers. So we have other lawyers in the building that do different things. And that's ended up being a robust way to practice, too, because things come up when we have to do, we have collection lawyers in our building. We've got a bankruptcy lawyer. We've got a family lawyer. And then my firm has the top floor. And so I still practice. That's still the plan. And actually, through this time, I evolved into having an office in Tomah, which was an office share. And probably a significant number of my cases come throughout the state through that Tomah area. And I'm now in the process of trying to up my presence there a little bit, because my partner in the Tomah office is now the local judge. And so I'm gonna do something a little bit more official.
Oh, that's great. You're like riding the circuit down, like Lincoln. You're riding the circuit through Wisconsin now.
A bit. I don't know that there's anybody here. There's the Milwaukee lawyers who are a lot of great talent. There's the Madison lawyers, also a lot of really great talent. And then I've got a friendly relationship with who we'd even consider to be our competitors. I guess, if they're working on the same type of case, but I never really looked at it that way. So I end up co-trying cases with other lawyers in that part of the state from my town. Really, every single county. And I don't know that there's a lot of folks that go everywhere with that often, but usually only in two areas. Like I know you and I both have really honed our specialty into the trucking or the catastrophic injury type cases, either trucking or nursing home. So I do a fair amount of those, but a lot of auto work still, and different ways that folks get hurt.
That's great. So, when I interview people, one of the things that people want to know when they hire a lawyer they want to know your track record, and I was checking out your little homework and checked out your website, and wow, you've got a lot of accomplishments for which I consider to be a young man. But can you? I know there's been a lot of defining moments in your personal life, but maybe you could share with us a defining moment or two that basically may have accelerated your growth as a person.
Boy, I mean, unfortunately, probably the most significant thing is you and I share. You almost lost your wife, and I did lose, my wife, and we had young kids at the time, and that level of trauma really defines you probably more than anything else. And so my biggest verdict accomplishments came really, not just by coincidence, but significantly after that, where I felt like the tragedy and the hardship made me connect on a whole nother level, maybe. And then fortunately was lucky enough to meet somebody and fall in love again. And I'm married, and she's also a lawyer. And so, sometimes the great experiences define you in that way too. So I think that, overcoming these things, overcoming hardship is also good. But I've probably the most significant thing professionally has been the loyalty of my clients. Like you and I have talked about, Joe, when they put their whole, we can have another case. They only can have one case, and they put that trust in you that you're not going to accept that offer for, $100,000 or $1 million or whatever. And to take that risk, and to, what you and I had to do is essentially bet your house to go to trial. That is the most defining thing. That is the most awesome. And to see sometimes it doesn't always happen, but to see justice get done when you've essentially bet everything.
I was looking at your website, amazing. And I see that you've been in leadership at the Wisconsin Association for Justice forever, but now you're in pretty big leadership, huh?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Next year will be, well, if things maintain on course, next year I'll be the president of the Wisconsin Association for Justice, which, as you know, is our trade organization. And you and I have met each other through the national part of that, the American Association of Justice. And those things have been very important for my career. The networking on the statewide level, and that has been essential for my development professionally. And then the networking on the national level has been probably even greater, because, like, for example, you and I aren't always in each other's backyards. So you and I, will co-refer cases to each other, work together, share names of, experts, experiences, things like that. So you and I share that in common as well, Joe, is that having that co-mentorship while you're going through similar things just makes you a better. You never know when you need it either. I mean, you can be prepping on something in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden you'll have that idea that you learned from your colleague, and you can turn things around. It's really, that's an important part of our. I feel like I'm a poster now for our organization and to get more involved. But that is absolutely true.
Sometimes
we learn from each other.
I think people are a little short-sighted with, some of these things are pretty expensive. Some of these groups that we belong to, the travel, like, for example, when there's national conventions that we need to go to, and they're in far-flung areas, and you end up having to pay all the dues, etc., and then you have to pay for the hotel and the flights, etc. But one of the things that I believe in any business is the richness of your life is the depth of your relationships. And, one of the things that as a lawyer that does what we do, there's a common bond between a lot of us 100% commission salesmen, is that, we all basically are on the line with our clients because we believe in them. And, when you meet another woman or man who's gone through that type of thing, where they stand next to a client in front of a jury or a judge, I think the jury can sense that connection that we have with our clients, that we really want to, and to advocate for them, but we're standing with them, and to meet those folks at these different conventions and these lifelong relationships. I mean, they're invaluable, aren't they?
I too, and really the reason I got into it is I figured that would be the best way to learn at a higher level. That if people were going to kind of hold back locally a little bit because of a sense of competition, that I felt like why not learn from the best lawyers in the country? So that's kind of how I started at it. But I agree with you 100%, Joe, that what it's evolved into is the closest of that bond. When I go to trial, I feel, of course, the closeness first and foremost and always to my client. But I think what a jury feels in us too is our overall commitment to justice anywhere. And to getting, that if I do well for this person today, then that's going to help your person tomorrow. And that ability to be with those folks. And you don't really realize, I had an opportunity the hard way to learn how strong that bond is, because I've had to have a funeral of a close family member, and I watched those folks that I had met really only through national conventions and talking with and co-speaking with and doing cases with, showed up in force, and then getting married again. Who comes to Milwaukee in December for a wedding? I had people from Florida coming up, and these people that I have known throughout my whole life that are dear friends, but share this overwhelming commitment to justice. That is, you're right, it's expensive, and now to sustain our organizations, because we're up against some powerful interests. I'm even doing a sustaining membership at the leadership level. It's a lot of money, but it comes back to you, not just in referrals, but what you learn. If you learn something from somebody that increases the value of the case for your client, I look at it as an investment, like you said, the personal investment and then the professional investment.
So let's switch gears here a little bit. Can you tell us any defining, specific cases that you worked on that really made you feel, and still to this date make you feel like, that you picked the right profession, and that they get you up in the morning and says, listen, I want to go do that for somebody else?
That's really almost any one of them, right? Because you and I have had this discussion where I never really look at it like, let's say one person's case is, I don't look at it as, oh, that's my $1 million case, or that's my $10 million case, or that's my $10,000 keep the light on sort of case. So I think, first of all, you're either built to help everybody, or you shouldn't be taking the case. And to some extent, we have to say no sometimes on that. But I really had a defining case where it was so significant, and I was at sort of the lowest point after, my wife had died under absolutely traumatic circumstances, and I had this big case set for trial, and so the defense had tried to take advantage of some of those things, and I figured to myself, if my client had been crushed within like a millimeter of his life behind a semi truck and had bled out completely and stood back up, if he could do that, then I could do that for him in a courtroom where they were trying to blame him and blame everything else on him. And so that was really, going in on a no offer case. And, the award was one of the record awards here, over $10 million when all is said and done. And when nobody thought you could win that case, and the case came in, I tried it with a dear friend of mine who I had only met through these national trial lawyer conventions. We happened to be in New Orleans, 3 years before this case got tried. And we were sitting in a meeting together because we were both in our respective leadership in Ohio, and a mutual friend of ours in Las Vegas happened to be the sister of this person in Wisconsin. And so, and he's crushed. And so we immediately get on airplanes and fly to meet him at the hospital here in Milwaukee, and just poured everything into that case. And then my trauma happened, midway through it, but he didn't give up on me. My client didn't give up on me. And that was just the most inspirational thing that I think I could ever have. And here you can talk to your jurors afterwards, and they were hugging us. And, one of the jurors I'm friends with to this day, he and I enjoy this. I didn't know this at the time, because of course you can't fraternize with the jury, but he and I enjoy the same type of music. And so when we have concerts again, or when we have concerts, I'll see him at basically every concert we ever have. So that one, though, as a defining, like, sort of winning big in the unwinnable case, doesn't happen very often, but that's probably the most defining thing I don't know. I'd like to think I can do it every time, but that might be the high point.
I was going through your website, and I was looking at a lot of your background, and one of the things that always catches me with very successful business people, lawyers, doctors, bankers, or whatever, or even just successful people in general, is they're very involved in their community. They're very involved in giving back to the community. And are there any specific organizations that are near and dear to your heart that you really like to work with in Milwaukee?
You're right. I put those on the website because I also, like you, think that's important when we hold ourselves out there, that people know that we're part of our communities. So I've done a number of different projects. I started a friend organization to rehab a park, and we've always been givers back. We've given, our law firm gives scholarships for people to go to school that have an interest in safety. We've done that over time. I've sponsored exclusively sponsored, because the public school can't afford always people to go to the mock trial tournaments. So the local school to my office, where my daughter goes to school, but she doesn't, this is an in-between age for my two daughters. So I've been the top sponsor to send the mock trial team who won the state tournament to go on to compete nationally. They couldn't have otherwise have done that if they didn't raise money. So I've always done that level of sponsorship. And actually, the person that was calling me on the other line right now we have a trauma hospital here called Frederick, and I've been watching this COVID-19 thing happen. And I've seen a lot of people, and I also like to eat, as you know, when you look at me. So there's all the restaurants that are having trouble right now, but there's also some organic food providers and things like that. And I've been looking to see, these people that are healthcare workers, and right now, more than ever, are so essential. And I look at all the people that I've represented that have been at that trauma unit, and now that's where they're sending all the COVID-19 people. And I'm thinking to myself, well, these people can't survive on cheeseburgers and pizza. So I'm in the process now. I funded today, tomorrow, 300 people at that hospital are going to be getting a very healthy meal that is online with what you would get at, the best farm to table type restaurant, with rushing waters, salmon. And I want to eat the meal. And so it's a big expense to do that for our community, but we're sending over 300 meals there that I'm sponsoring tomorrow.
Oh man, I love hearing that story. One of my friends in New York worked with Eric Chafin's his name, worked with a deli in New York and provided kids with 4,000 meals and organized it over a week-long period, and it was like amazing. And now you're doing this for the trauma folks at a hospital, and boy, that stuff is stuff that we all need to do as business people, is help these other folks. I mean, you're helping out the restaurant too, by ordering some food from them, because nobody's going to restaurants now.
Well, exactly. And her thing is even different. It's a woman-owned enterprise from the community right next to where my office is and where we go to school, and our kids go to the same schools. But her thing is more of a she would supply to different folks. So she did these meals where, you can bring them into your home. So I think she still has some of that business because she always did the takeout, but everybody is hurting in that industry right now. Everybody is hurting. And so, but I looked at how much it meant to me when I went through my various tragedies, and your neighbor, brings you we call them hot dish here, but or even a casserole, and just the comfort of having some just really good quality food in a time of despair, to just keep your energy focused and going. I don't have anything against fast food necessarily all the time, but it's hard to sustain like that. So that's just one. I think a lot of us right now are just looking at ways that we can help, and I know that you and I had that conversation where you said, you and I have had the benefit of representing folks that get referred mostly by other lawyers, and so helping out those other lawyers at a time like this, or other ways in the community. So yeah, I think this won't be the only endeavor that I'm going to do, although it's a very costly one. So I'm hoping to recruit.
All right, so there.
Yeah.
That's okay.
From the hospital.
Yeah. So listen, I want to close this out by, we're right now we're in the middle of a really difficult time for our country, in that, we're forced to all be apart. And, we're conducting this interview. I'm in Chicago area, and you're in Milwaukee. And it's so great to talk to a special guy like you, but it's so hard for all of these other folks that, we're used to getting into one room and coming together. Do you have any ideas or words that for folks to kind of get through this?
I don't know if I'm a real philosopher, or I don't know about that. I know what it's done for me is it's just, so I had a little tragedy over the weekend too. There's a lawyer in town that was more of a political friend, and we didn't even really like each other for the first 10 years that we practiced. Maybe our personalities were too dissimilar or too similar, and we would fight and things like that. He found himself diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and it took his life over the weekend. Oh. And so we've been posting on some social media about that, and I look back at the times that I just spent with him, and even after he was diagnosed, he became the most hopeful. He was always hopeful and uplifting, as acerbic as he could be, and as argumentative. He was equally philosophical. And so the last times that I would sit with him, he would still be wanting to talk about the law and who are you going to raise money for so that we can get our system of justice back, or keep it safe, and during anything. And so I've been drawing a lot about inspiration from folks like that, and from within. Like I said, we all want to do something right now, and I think that will bring out the best in us. I wish that some of our leaders were doing a better job at that, but that's what I think that I'm looking at least. And I know that you and I have always shared that sort of commitment to in tragedy bringing out our best selves in some way.
So we closing up this fella, Jay Urban, grew up in Tomah, born in Milwaukee, returned to his roots, and is now one of the leading trial lawyers in Wisconsin. Thank you so much for taking time to visit with us, and I hope that you'll jump on again when you have some great news to share. Will you make that commitment to us?
I will do, and my admiration for you is it goes both ways, Joe.
Well, thank you so much, my friend, and you have a great day, and we'll get through this.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the opening statement with Joe Shannon. You can find us on the internet at shannonlawgroup.com, or telephone our office at 312-578-9501. Have a terrific day.